In this video, I'll cover a slipcase with paper sides. The walls are covered in a strong buckram book cloth providing robustness, while the paper sides provide a decorative element. I make the underlying slipcase structure the same as in the video on making the slipcase body. I line the inside of the board with the handmade paper from Tasmania, made by the still excellently named Darren of Creative Papers. If you haven't already, check out his range of papers. The details are in the description below. The outside walls of the slipcase are covered in arbor-lave buckram. The turn-ins will get trimmed to size later, and I'm using 20mm turn-ins, so I make everything about 30mm oversize. I make the strip 2 times 30 longer than needed, and 2 times 30 plus the thickness of the slipcase wide. I draw a line 30mm in from the edge, so I have a line to align the slipcase as I roll it onto the covering material. Then I glue the walls one at a time, just like covering a tray. I guess the cameraman's getting a bit tired of this process, as I think he nodded off for a moment. I cut out from the corners to make it a bit easier to apply the cloth, and it needs to be done at some point anyway, and now is the easiest time to do it. Once all the sides are covered, I trim all the turn-ins to the same width. Anything from 15 to 25mm, a half to 1 inch is fine. I also cut parallel to the sides at the head and tail to make the tongue that will turn in at the ends. While I think of it, I should mention this approach is similar to what Eric Burdett describes in his book, The Craft of Bookbinding, another one of my favourite books. I'll turn in at the corners in a similar fashion to covering a tray, but I'm going to do a slight variation. I pull the piece at the head and tail over the edge of the board and mitre it in the usual fashion, but I don't pull the side cloth under it. I'll do the sides differently. I trim the head and tail pieces out from the mitre so the bulk of the flap fits inside the slipcase. Now I turn the cloth onto the outsides. I mitre the back corners just like I did for the base of a tray, also covered by wrapping cloth around the walls. I pull the cloth in tight at the corners and use a knife to cut through from the corner to the inside overlapping corner. Once I mitre the 4 back corners, I glue down the side turn-ins. Now I do the variation turning over the boards at the corners. I'm going to make a tongue that goes under the end turn-ins. I rub the cloth down over the edge of the board, which will leave a crease to show where to start the cut to make the tongue. I cut it so it is the thickness of the board. I cut mine to 10mm long. You don't want it too long, but long enough. I guess you could just leave it at 20mm. Then glue and turn in the 4 side tabs. Then the head and tail tabs are also turned in. The next step is optional, but I'll fill in inside the cloth turn-ins so I can't see them under the paper sides. I check the card I'm using is the same thickness as the cloth, and then I cut 2 pieces to fit inside the turn-ins. By carefully trimming the turn-ins before gluing them down, the space to fill in is usually square at the corners with parallel sides, but you may have to do some fine-tuning. One thing to watch for is covering paper that's light enough that you might see a dark coloured turn-in under it. I'm just going to get away with it this time. I'm going to leave a 5mm border around the outside of the paper sides. I make prick marks 5.5mm in from the edges to help me position the paper. When I place the paper, I will just cover the prick marks. I can measure the outside dimensions of the side of the slipcase and subtract 10mm to get the height and add 20 to get the width. The paper will also have a 20mm turn-in, but adding 20mm to the width, I should have 5mm to trim before turning in. Gluing out the paper for sides and positioning it can be a bit tricky. The best tip I can give is not to put a camera in your way. For the second side, I couldn't get a clear view of the prick marks while not getting in front of the camera, and it felt like I just about threw the paper at the case. I got very lucky and it landed just right. Having the grain direction of the paper head to tail is also very important. I'm more careful about rubbing down the wet paper than I am with robust buckram, and I use rubbing down paper so I don't damage it with my bone folder. I trim the turn ends to width, glue out and turn in. The sides of this slipcase are not as robust as being covered in full cloth, but it is a handsome looking result. I hope Mr. Middleton would be pleased to be housed in this slipcase. He might mention the board is a bit thick and the result is a bit clunky. I'd point out that the thicker board made it much easier to demonstrate in a video. I hope he would accept that. As always, I really appreciate you hitting the big thumbs up button. If you're able and want to, you can support the making of more videos like this through Patreon or with a one-off contribution, and the details are in the description below. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button. Until next time, cheerio.